Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming and having a listen to what will be somewhat of a fireside chat. We were thinking about having Chris up here on the podium all alone, but
I'd rather not do that. So
two heads are better than one. My name is Nathan Chaney. I have a little brand and thing that I'm building called Supply Chaney. You get it? And I'm really just here to talk about supply chain with everyone. I spent a number of years working in the supply chain industry, have a degree in logistics. I've spent many years in warehouses, on docks, in trucks, doing all of the things. And now I kind of get the honor of just getting to talk to people about it. And so on my podcast, for example, I've had over 100 episodes where I've talked to a lot of folks that are very similar to Chris, that have been in the industry, have seen things, found opportunities, built businesses to go solve problems. And that's really one of my favorite things to do is just hear those stories and try to tease out some nuggets of wisdom and information and share those with folks. So appreciate you all taking some time and spending your morning, your 11:15 time block with us here. Chris, I'll hand over the sort of digital mic here to you real quick and let you do a quick intro.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And thanks for doing this with me. So I'm Chris Smith. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Slip Robotics. My background is mostly as an operator in supply chain. So I was at Cummins, early career in their supply chain, mostly focused on inbound warehousing, so getting parts into manufacturing plants. Did some work on the distribution side before going over to Tesla. At Tesla, I was there during Model 3 ramp on factory design and material flow automation. Learned a whole lot of things during that period of time about what works in automation, what doesn't. And then went to a small startup in the Bay Area as one of their early engineers, well, the first engineer at that startup, with actually one of my co-founders at Slip. And then Slip started in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, so yeah.
Well, great time to be starting a business, I think.
Yeah, it was super interesting because it was very difficult at the beginning, but then everybody was focused on supply chain and logistics at the end of 2020, and so it was really a boon to us.
Yeah, I can imagine a bit of a slingshot effect.
Yes.
So I really dig talking to folks that have spent time on factory floors, that have gotten a little bit of, maybe dirt under their fingernails. And I feel like that time that you spent with those organizations gave you some perspective and let you see some gaps or some problems. My favorite podcast is actually How I Built This. So I want to take 1 second here and tell me a little bit about the why and the inspiration behind Slip. Yeah,
I think it was interesting. So when I was at Cummins, we had these, I said I was working on, getting parts into manufacturing plants, right? The way a lot of industry typically does that is they have these offsite warehouses that are feeding those manufacturing plants at a high frequency, right? To do that material flow. So I saw, we were loading a truck for half an hour to 45 minutes to drive it in many cases 5 minutes down the road to unload it for half an hour and 45 minutes, right? And so that kind of, I saw this and was like, man, that's a lot of effort for that last 5 minutes in the supply chain. And then I went to, a Tesla where we were building a whole new factory from the ground up. It was supposed to be the biggest factory in the world, right? And we still had this offsite warehouse 5 minutes down the road doing the exact same thing, right? And so when I realized this is a common operating paradigm, that was interesting. Now, ultimately, there wasn't really a solve for that I found, that we saw that was interesting in the market. But then I worked at that startup that I went to was a robotic valet. So we're moving cars around parking garages, and I was sitting there looking and saying, if we can move a heavy payload around a parking garage, what you should do is load and unload trucks like that. And that's kind of how Slip started, was with that idea that this short haul, high frequency truck transportation could be improved significantly.
I want to just kind of do something and get a little engagement going on here. I want to have an idea of who's in the audience here. So for those of you all that are actually in the warehouse and distribution center space, you're an operator, you're doing something with physical, can you just raise your hand real quick so we can see? All right, we've got a couple. How many people are here because you really saw those really cool, the slip robots right there at the entrance of the hall? You wanted to learn a little bit more? A few more there. Okay, all right, there we go. Yeah. So we've got a little bit of a lay of the land here. Chris, I spend an equal amount of time probably in warehouse automation, warehouse robotics, and that sort of side, and also on-road automation and autonomous vehicles. And I think, in my time, I was hearing this concept that the 2010s were kind of the decade of warehouse automation. All the conveyors and robots and everything kind of exploded in that 2010s timeframe. And what I was hearing was that the 2020s was really all about on-road automation. So we see all the driverless trucks and the commercialization and kind of scaling up of on-road automation. And so I'm kind of sensing you're kind of in the middle of both of those. Could you kind of just tell us a little bit about how you're kind of working, I guess, to bridge that gap between those two spaces? Yeah,
it was funny, I was in the Bay Area working at that startup, and I saw all this stuff about autonomous trucks, right? That was when they were really kind of ramping up. And I'd been around a lot of material flow automation, right? And it was amazing to me that we could potentially get to a point where you can fully automate internally within the warehouse, you can fully automate the trucking, but we would still have a person going back and forth with a forklift. It was kind of an odd future for me. And so I think that was one thing that led to this is like, we need to find a way to bridge from the automation that's in the facility to the automation that is on the road, right? And I think in many ways, these are just layers of automation getting added, right? I agree, like we start where, typically we start where it's easiest, right? To add that automation, and then we'll kind of layer on where you can get additional benefit by adding that layer. And so for us, it was clear that there were these layers being added, but there was a missing middle in that interface.
I see. And did you kind of like, in your experience, did you kind of have some hands-on experience with, I guess, just the pain kind of caused in that gap being there?
Yeah, I mean, when we were, so Tesla Gigafactory, I mean, this is all very public, it was supposed to be a lights out facility, right? And so we put in a massive amount of automation into that facility. And then also very public, we tore a bunch of that automation out shortly thereafter. And we spec'd all this automation, and one of the places where there really was never automation was trailer loading and unloading. And that was because like the market, there's a lot of solutions in the market, but there was nothing that was really applicable to the manufacturing, especially on the inbound side of what we were looking at. So I was super familiar with kind of what was in the space, and what we provide is kind of a unique concept of how that can be solved.
So I actually, to pull on that thread a little bit, when you're trying to introduce something where you are a unique concept and you're a little bit of a first mover, there's a bit of some friction and a challenge with educating the market, letting people know first that there's a problem and that you've got a solution. Can you kind of talk through that education effort that you've had to go through over the past 5 years?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because a lot of times when people see our product, I get one of a few responses, right? Okay. Which is, like, oh, I thought about that a long time ago. And my response to that is always like, well, you should have done something because it's a good idea. The second thing is, well, there's, it takes up space, or, there's these considerations that are very true trade-offs to what we do, right? And so there is just education around like, yes, this is a trade-off, but does it actually impact in a negative way your operation, right? And in many cases it doesn't, right? And so in those cases you get pure benefit from using the solution. And so it really is just an education around like when you would use this and when you wouldn't, right? And initially with our first product, that was if you're doing short haul, high frequency truck transportation, we should talk, right?
Right. Well, a lot of folks, in manufacturing environments or in just pure distribution, retail, time is money. Seconds, minutes, hours add up. And when you can shave some of that off, makes a really big difference. For the kind of executives in the room, can you kind of paint a picture of what the cost of a slow dock is? Not just cost in time, but there's safety, there's quality, there's other elements to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different things, right? When I have a slow dock, I am using the amount of labor required over that time because of that slow dock. So I have a forklift driver, literally, if I'm doing pallet load, driving in and out of a trailer 26 times to load that trailer, right? in some cases my driver is waiting during that time, and other times they're doing a drop and hook, so they're basically utilizing the asset of the trailer during that long period of time. So there's costs related to equipment, human labor. There's safety, right? Like docks are one of the least safe places in an industrial environment, and that's because of pull-away incidents, fall-through incidents, cross traffic at the dock. And so those are all true, but also one thing that's really interesting and that came from kind of my manufacturing background was when we were designing the factory, right, we had to consider the time it took to get from an offsite warehouse to line side, right? And that time is what determined how big of a buffer we needed to hold at the manufacturing site. And most people, when they look at a manufacturing site, don't realize that almost 50% of the space in many cases is just line side storage, right? Like the actual size of the production is often small compared to what is line side. And so if you can reduce that time by an hour, because you don't have that half an hour staging lane to trailer movement on the front end, and then the same thing on the receiving, you can reduce that time and variability, and that leads to lower line side buffer quantities. And so there's all these like space considerations, labor considerations, safety, that all get improved if you can just move faster.
Yeah. And sort of speaking of moving faster, all of those elements, the cost of safety incidents, the cost of labor, the cost of kind of everything we just talked about is at the lowest point it's going to ever be today. Yes, all of these 100%. Things, the cost is just growing. Yes. And so there is a sense of urgency, and the sooner you can kind of put in a solution to this, the better. Yeah,
and that's exactly right. And the reason this solution exists today is because the costs of the sensors and the equipment cost related to a robot like this has come down while the costs of labor have gone up. And so we basically have finally reached the point where that trade-off makes sense, right? And so you're basically trading an asset cost with a labor cost, right? And so you'll see as you look at automation out here, like the ones that make the most sense are the ones that have already crossed that threshold where the cost of labor is above the cost of the asset that you're using.
Like it. I hope you all are taking some notes. This is Chris's Economics 101 class. All right, so let's talk more numbers. So one thing that, I've been following y'all's progress. I go to a ton of trade shows. Slip Robotics is always there. Always got these booths that look just like this. And what I notice is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it in this particular image, but on the side it's load or unload any trailer in 5 minutes. And as folks that work in those environments know, it's usually a 30-minute to 1 hour ordeal. So can you kind of just walk us through exactly what that looks like? So kind of paint us a mental picture.
Yeah, so basically the robots, they sit in the staging lane. They become the staging lane for the operation. So forklifts will load those robots, right? When the truck gets there, the robots will go into the truck, they'll stay in the truck, and they'll come off on the other side. That is with our Slip Bot product, which we've had since 2023, but our new product that we released this year with the Slip Lift, basically it decouples those two things, and you have the robot pick up what we call a tray. The tray goes into the trailer, the robot drops it off, comes out, and then that tray goes with the freight, and a robot on the other side picks it up. In both cases, we get that 5-minute load and unload. And that's basically just the time it takes to go from staging lane into trailer. And that move in many operations is already decoupled, right? You're already going from your warehouse shelf into a staging lane, and then when the truck gets there, going from the staging lane into the trailer. So we're basically focused on that staging lane to trailer move in both cases.
I like to learn about how things work. I like to dig into the details just a little bit if you can't tell. And so I'm curious, maybe you can settle a bet between Chris and I. Is loading faster or unloading faster, or are they exactly both 5 minutes?
They're pretty close to the same time. Really the only difference is like when you're loading, the robot automatically lines itself up with the trailer and then goes in. Obviously when you're unloading, it's already lined up with the trailer, so it can just come out. But yeah, basically in both cases, it's 5 minutes or under for the load and the unload. What that does is it creates an incredibly consistent motion, right? So one of the most exciting things for me, for customers, is seeing their time from an offsite to a factory beforehand, is this variable time with each load. After they deploy with us, that not only gets shorter, right? It not only becomes less time to get from offsite to line side, but also the time variability in that is much more narrow, right? And that is actually from you don't staff for average, right? You don't staff for average. You don't do your safety stock in your factory due to averages. You do it based on that variability, and because of that, it actually has an outsized impact than what you'd consider from just going from 30 minutes to 5 minutes.
That reminds me of a story. I was getting a tour of a BNSF intermodal ramp, and the tour guide said, all right, if you've got a train, would you prefer to have that train early or late? Of course, it was a trick question. You want it on time.
Yeah.
You don't want 100 cars showing up in your rail yard an hour early. That's also detrimental to the operation.
When we deploy, that's one of the things we have to consider, right? Is the first time you're going to get this shipment, it's going to get there an hour sooner than last time, right? And so you do have to figure that out with the customer to kind of make those changes required to do that.
I see. When we are talking about a robot going into a trailer and going on a little drive, I remember originally thinking and talking with other folks around your booths when I was walking and talking with folks, it was like, robots are expensive. They're not exactly cheap. And you're kind of taking this thing and rolling it onto a trailer and sending it on its merry way. And that whole idea of asset utilization, right? ROI. And so it was always kind of in the back of my brain, what's the logic behind putting this kind of fancy piece of technology in a 150-degree trailer to drive across state and whatnot? Can you just help out with the economics of that? And then I get the feeling that might lead to why the Slip Bot was created.
Yeah. So the initial version, basically in the high frequency short haul scenario, it ROIs really well, right? Like that, it's actually quite easy to get that ROI because of the amount of loading and unloading you're doing in a day. Like many of our customers are doing, anywhere from 6 to 40, loads and unloads in a day, and that you get that ROI as long as you're not going like across the country, right? And that asset is sitting in that trailer for a long period of time. You get that ROI quickly. The slip lift that we just announced, the decoupling, what that does is it decouples that asset cost, right? So yes, like robots are expensive. Now, our robot is purpose-built for this task, meaning we basically, the only cost on the robot is the cost required to do exactly this function. And so we can bring it down to a point where that does have ROI. But with the slip lift, we've decoupled, so that robot that stays at the site can load another truck in the next 5 minutes, right? And so basically every 5 minutes that robot can be loading a truck. So it actually can load many more trucks than a forklift can, right? Because a forklift can only load a truck every half an hour to 45 minutes, right? Because that's how long it takes. So that decoupling allows us to work on a much broader set of use cases, right? We were really focused on manufacturing short haul, but now we have applications across, obviously still in manufacturing, but in distribution and parcel and e-commerce, and we have military applications, right? And that's because you can just get a much broader, you've decoupled that asset cost.
Yeah, okay. I'm curious, could you take a moment and just kind of share a success story? For me, hearing stories, right? Storytelling, and kind of sharing what was the state before, what was the status kind of after y'all came in. Can you share one of those?
Yeah, so I mean, a good example of this is we had a manufacturing company that we're working with that when we launched with them, it took about 2 hours, right, to get from the offsite warehouse to a line side, and afterwards it moved, and that was 2 hours, and it was variable by half an hour.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was a huge difference, and there was a expectation of when it would get there, right? And I always say, the person we're working with was production control, right? And they have one of the most difficult jobs because if the time it takes goes over that expectation, they're getting a call from some part of the line saying, hey, we're down, the line stopped because we don't have this material.
Yep.
And so literally a week after we deployed, that time went down significantly, and that variability became super consistent such that they're no longer getting that call, right? Which is like really important for that customer. that's an example on the manufacturing side. Another great example is we deployed with a e-commerce company where we have a bin version of our tray. That e-commerce company, by using our bin, has been able to put more parcels into a trailer, and I can get into details onto why that's the case, but they can get more parcels into a trailer than when they were floor loading that trailer. And because of that, they can reduce the number of drivers that they need to run their freight, right? So it's not just a dock labor savings, it also has an impact on driver labor and other considerations.
I see a little bit of like a two birds with one stone scenario, it sounds like there.
Exactly.
A little double dipping. I'm curious, the success that you all have had over the last 5 or 6 years, I would say indicates that you're solving a real problem that exists. That problem kind of changes and evolves a little bit over time. I'm kind of curious how you stay apprised of where the pain points are for customers and familiar and kind of staying in their operations so that you continue to solve the right problems and the ones that matter?
Yeah, one of the ways we do that is we're a robot as a service model. Service is a big part of what we do, and we take it super seriously. And because of that, we get feedback loops, right? Okay. Of like what is working, what is not working at our customer sites. And as we get those feedback loops, we use that to drive product development, right? And so we say, like our first robot we ever deployed was 90 inches wide, and it was so it could go into a box truck or a 53-foot trailer. We deployed with our first customer and immediately realized like they wanted to fill the entire width of a 53-foot trailer, and so we created edge extensions that basically allow us to adjust to whatever width that customer needs. It's stuff like that that like we had another customer that said, we don't want to plug in your robots. And we're like, yeah, that makes sense. So we moved to a swappable battery system so that we could keep those robots running 100% of the time and adding value without having to have like additional fleet to do that charging. Right. So it's things like that, those pain points that customers have that we're constantly using as feedback for our product development. But it's also what led to the Slip Lift, right? Which is we saw the benefit we were giving a certain segment of the market, and we said, how can we get this benefit for a broader segment?
Right. Walking the floor out there, we see lots of robots and things, and automation, obviously we're at Automate. And I think that, I'm no economist, but it sounds like the typical ROI payback period for these kinds of solutions is 12 to 24 months. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, time is money. And in order to convince a board or a CEO to invest, you really need to like prove that, hey, this is going to pay for itself in X amount of time. And the fact that the way that you've kind of built it, and I'll let you go into the design and the intention that you have there, is it sounds like you're trying to get that ROI and that payback period as soon as possible. Okay,
we want to make it as soon as possible and as like clean as possible, that ROI. So the way we built our solution, we can essentially instantly deploy to our customers, right? Like we can come into a site we've never been before and instantly operate. We don't require any modification to docks. We don't require any modification to trailers. Our charger plugs into a normal 120 outlet, right? All those design considerations are because we want to instantly be able to provide our customers return. And I think that the reason that's so important is automation is improving and getting better at a very fast pace. Right? And so in order for you to have any confidence that your decision is going to be a good one, if you have a 2, 3, or 4 year payback on your decision, I can tell you in 2 years stuff is going to be a lot better, right? And so it's going to be really hard to stay on the deploying solutions if your payback isn't in that short period of time. That's an interesting part of the market right now, but I do think that for us, we want to be, 3-4 month payback for our customers is our target.
Excellent. Talking about like having that difficulty getting the return on the investment, you speak about it as if you have some personal experience in the past, and having come from some environments where there was a lot of innovation and automation promised. Any stories that you can kind of draw from
like
that?
I said, we ripped out a bunch of automation, right? Like I think I've seen the difference between how much automation I've seen put in and ripped out is Probably about the same.
Wow, okay.
I've seen a lot of that, and some of that is because stuff got better, and right, we wanted to improve and do things like that. Other times it was because it didn't work as initially promised, right? And so for us, what we're focused on is like, how do we make sure that what we provide is capable of doing the thing? One thing I always say is it does the thing, right? And what I mean by that is what you see. It's like a what you see is what you get type thing, right? And I think in the automation world, it is awesome when it does the thing, right? That's not always the case.
Well, you put some sensors and motors on a cookie sheet, and I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
you take the capabilities and the tech that exists today, put them on a slab, and say go. Obviously, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part for us isn't like the software. It's that slip lift can move 20,000 pounds.
Okay.
And if you've seen a 20,000 pound forklift, they're not small, right? And so. It is all about packaging and about really solving in a very focused way the problem we're going after in a way that will actually give good return for our customers.
Oh, all right. So some thought and engineering went into this.
A little bit. I think it's all about being purpose built, right?
Yeah.
For the problem.
There's one thing as we kind of, especially as we look at this image that's on the screen right now, it reminds me a little bit of this other invention from 1956. Many of y'all may be familiar with it. It's the shipping container. And for those that kind of pay attention to that, it revolutionized things because before then, cargo was all sorts of shapes and sizes and having to be manually unloaded. And that standardization across the entire maritime shipping industry unlocked so much efficiency, allowed just commerce to flow more smoothly, and not to draw comparisons here, but I feel like the slip robots are kind of the equivalent of that, of being able to take something that can be messy. Like this is a very clean load that you're looking at here with these gaylords and whatnot in crates, but a lot of stuff can be really messy, and that takes a while to put in. And so I feel like y'all are trying to standardize a little bit kind of what that moving element.
Yes, exactly. It is a comparison that we think about a lot, right?
Okay.
This kind of containerization aspect. The shipping container had a huge impact on ocean freight, right? It allowed freight to move much faster through nodes in the network, right? Through those different ports. It opened up global trade. It did things that have totally changed supply chains, right? And the reason for that is it did two things. One, it decoupled the loading from the asset cost, right? So the asset cost in this case was boats, right? And what was happening is it used to take a week to load a boat, right? Because you take individual packages and you put them in, and then that boat would be sitting there that whole time during that load and unload on the other side. When the shipping container came along, it decoupled that, right? Now you were loading these shipping containers, and you could load all those shipping containers on the boat because they were all standard in a day, right? And so with Slip, we think about it the same way from a trucking perspective. We don't think that the trailer is the appropriate form factor for that. Actually, we think there's a lot of asset cost related to a trailer that is more than is necessary to sit there for the load and unload, and there's a space consideration as well. And so we think that a tray is a better form factor. These are what we call trays. And a pallet is really too small, right? A pallet is really ideal for LTL, less than truckload shipping. It's not ideal for full truckload, right? One thing, I like to go back to the basics of so I'm an industrial engineer kind of in the back, and one of the things that I'm focused on is if you go into a staging lane, right? If you put your freight into a staging lane, you're creating a batch in that staging lane. As soon as you create a batch in your material flow, you should keep that batch as long as you can to break that batch, right? What you don't want to do is create a batch, break it to create the same batch again, break it to create the same. And that's essentially what you're doing when you create a staging lane and then do a forklift load of a trailer, right? You create a batch and then you break it to go into the trailer. What we try to do is say, okay, you're creating this batch, now keep it as long as you can through your supply chain, and then once you need to, then break it, right? And if you can do that, then you really have optimized that material flow. And essentially, with automation, that's what you're trying to do, is find like the most optimal kind of path for your material or for your process. And in many ways, many times that takes kind of abstracting away what we've done because of our human, what we can do as a human to solve that.
I see. I think one of the things that gets people to stop at your booth, not just the optics of it, but also kind of that 5-minute promise. And so I feel like that speed, that differentiation from 60 minutes to 5 minutes, that kind of wins people's attention. It stops the scroll, it gets people to stop and pause. But that doesn't exactly kind of keep them winning and excited, at the board level, at the leadership level, in the long term. What wins there is it easy? Is it easy to maintain? Is it reliable? Is it consistent? Does it have uptime? Those sort of things, right? That's what you get them in, but the long tail after that is really kind of what can help make or break a solution. Can you talk about that sort of service after the sale? Like who is it that's running the operations and the robots? Who's responsible for maintenance, and what does training look like? I'll let that.
So we do with the robot as a service model that we do. It's a white glove model, meaning like all the customer has to do is operate, right? So we do all maintenance, damage repair. These are around forklifts, so obviously they're going to get damaged. Like that just should be an assumption. But we're responsible for making sure that they stay operational, and then it also incentivizes us to make a more robust product, right? To make sure that a forklift doesn't just destroy it, right? And so there's that, but then the customer is responsible for operating, and so we train operators, right? Our solution is a kind of a cobot solution, so it's autonomous in and out of the truck. In the case of a tray, it's autonomous in and out of the tray, but around the dock, it's a safety-assisted remote control. And the reason for that is to give people the maximum amount of automation while still maintaining a lot of flexibility around that dock, because docks are changing environments, right? And so we deploy that way, but that means we train operators, right? What's awesome is it is easier to train an operator, like basically we use what looks like a Nintendo Switch, right, to control. It's easier to train somebody to load a truck with our robot than it is to train them to load a truck with a forklift, 100%. Like it takes way less time. We have operators that are pushing 90 years old, which loading on a forklift with that operator would be much more difficult, but with a controller they can do it, right? And so, the simplicity is what gets it so that people can just continuously use it in their operations. We deploy across production operations that are 24/7. We deploy across in small and medium-sized businesses and large enterprise. And we can do that because it's simple to deploy, simple to operate, and we make sure that it is working for the customer.
Can you kind of make this boy's dreams come true right now real quick? And do you all have any situations where you have autonomous forklifts loading kind of the autonomous robot that goes in? I mean,
I would love that.
Okay.
We do not currently have any of those.
Okay.
It's an interesting situation because anytime anybody asks me, I'm like, I don't care what puts freight onto onto the tray, right? Like it doesn't matter. I'd love that to happen. I think the reality of what I've seen in the industry is like we're usually some of the first automation in the material flow of the places we go, right?
Okay.
And so there are some cases where there are AMRs and other types of things kind of within a factory or within, in some cases, within a warehouse. But in most cases, we are some of the first.
I see. I mean, it makes sense. If we've got like kind of a low infrastructure requirement, it's lower sort of barriers to making that decision, and then also the fast ROI.
Yeah.
Couple those together, kind of makes sense. Yeah. It seems like a good gateway drug to more.
I don't think it's far
automation.
off. Like I think we're starting to see a case where I don't think it's a super big dream to see a place where we get forklifts or other equipment putting stuff onto Slip. Slip goes into a truck, that truck goes autonomously down the road, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I see the path, all those pieces getting to a point where that will be the eventuality.
And I'm, from my perspective, I'm hearing more and more in the last year or two this concept of autonomous supply chains. I think a lot of people use that term in relation to the decisions, the ERPs and the systems in the back end, kind of like thinking autonomy, self-healing when there's problems and there's storms and whatnot, but there's a physical component to that as well. And so if you can have that autonomy existing both in the physical realm and in digital and online in the cloud, kind of seems like a match.
The benefit of doing that on the physical side is very significant, right? So I think there's a lot of benefit to finding those solutions that work you towards that path.
Okay. We're going to save a few minutes here at the end, so get ready with your questions here, but we got just a couple more here. You all are here undoubtedly to learn, take some notes, take some action items, take something back with you, right? You know, you're investing your time and effort here today. Chris, what would you kind of leave folks with as far as what they can take back to their organizations?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned this briefly, but I think that one of the most interesting things is that everything is changing super quickly. Right, and so what's really hard right now is actually like making a decision and acting, right, and like choosing a solution you want to go with. I think one of the reasons why we do everything kind of the way we do from a simplicity standpoint and an ease of deployment and a fast payback is because the solutions you should look for in the market, we believe, look like that, right? They're solutions that I can be confident that I will immediately kind of start getting return, and I will immediately start getting benefit. And so, because I don't know what 2, 4, 5 years, what will happen in that time period, but I do know that I can provide a ton of benefit in that near term. And I'm confident because of our model, we are highly incentivized to provide benefit throughout, right? And so I think sometimes we get in this kind of decision fatigue, right, of knowing what we should do when stuff is changing so quickly. And I think what's really important is that you do something, right? And that something should be, because you want to do something, should be something that you have high confidence will get return.
Certainly. And I suppose, given that we're here at Automate, and y'all have got a big, beautiful booth right there that folks are invited to come hang out and chat it up with y'all.
Yeah, we're at North 28,000 is our booth. We're right there to the right of the entrance on the north side, and yeah, feel free to come by and chat.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.